One cruiser's close call reminds me of some tips for managing an overflowing bilge, whether at anchor or underway. I'm Carolyn Sherlock, and on this episode of the Boat Galley Podcast, learn why just turn it off is the first step to keeping your boat just a little bit safer. Today's episode of the Boat Galley Podcast is sponsored by Sail Dauntless, your personalized sailing adventure in the most beautiful locations. Experience the utmost in luxury cruising just the way you want it. Get back in the sailing groove on board this beautiful 52-foot sailboat where every detail is taken care of for you. Now booking in Newport, Rhode Island and the Hamptons, New York for summer 2021. Use coupon code SD15 for 15% off any 7-night all-inclusive sailing charter from July to September of 2021. Ready to live the dream? SailDauntless.com. Let our experience inspire yours. This podcast arises out of a Voice of Experience article in Sail magazine. In brief, it's the story of a freshwater hose clamp that came loose while underway from Florida to the Bahamas. With the clamp loose, the pressure switch on the freshwater pump kept the pump on, pumping all the water from the tank into the bilge and threatening the batteries and engine. The engine noise and then the bilge pump noise obscured what was happening so that the owners didn't initially realize what the problem was. So basically, 3 tips from this. First, turn the freshwater pump off when you're not using it. You might leave it on as you're preparing a meal and doing dishes, but turn it off afterwards, particularly if you're leaving the boat. And underway, when you might be in the cockpit and regular boat noises can make it hard to hear the pump running. A bilge alarm or noise that goes off when the bilge pump runs. We had a very obnoxious whooper wired into the bilge pump on our first boat. They cost very little and they can alert you to a problem before you'd notice it otherwise. There's a link to the type of thing that we had in the show notes if you want to know more about this. Now, if you have unexpected amounts of water in the bilge, the first thing to do is check it if it's salt or fresh water if you're in salt water. Even in fresh water, you can often tell if it's tank water or lake or river water just from the taste. Now, when you're motoring, you might get a little water in the bilge from the packing gland. For us, it meant that if we didn't run our small bilge pump, we had 2, a large capacity one that was mounted higher in the bilge and wired in with a float switch and alarm, and then the small one that was located lower, it only had a manual switch, no alarm. If we didn't run it every few hours, the big pump would go off with the whooper about 4 hours of motoring. Now, we learned that if we were motoring, we should run the little bilge pump every hour when we made our log entries and at the end of a trip. That took care of the packing gland drip. And that made it so that if the whooper did go off, we knew we had a problem. Now, twice it did go off in the middle of the night. And yes, we woke in an absolute panic. The fact that the pump turned off after about 30 seconds calmed us slightly. Obviously, the pump could keep up. With one, the taste test revealed it was fresh water, and we discovered a pinhole leak in our freshwater tank. The other one, a little more scary, turned out to be salt water, and it was a problem with our stuffing box had been removed and reinstalled on a haul-out. We had just relaunched. Turning off the freshwater pump when you're not using it reduces the possibility of a problem occurring. And if you only turn it on when you need it, you'll immediately realize that you have a problem if you turn it on without a faucet open and it just starts running and doesn't stop quickly. I mean, usually when you first turn it on, it'll run a few seconds to pressurize the system, but then it'll stop. If it keeps running, you've got a problem somewhere. And yes, we had that happen too. And we were able to find the problem very quickly. It's actually happened a couple of times. It's a faulty pressure switch in the pump. We were able to verify that no water was flowing into the bilge. That meant there wasn't a loose connection or a crack or hole in a hose. We could easily see that there wasn't a leaking faucet. Changing out the pump, We had an absolute duplicate in our spares both times. Took only about 30 minutes and solved the problem. Okay, that last part was a digression from the main point of this podcast. A good standard operating procedure in your boat is to turn off your freshwater pump when you're not using it. But it's a good example of how you troubleshoot little problems like hearing that pump running and running. Have you found this podcast to be helpful? I hope so. Please subscribe to the podcast, leave reviews, and tell other people all about it. Thanks so much.